The black widowed mother stood in her modest parlor, hands trembling as she faced the weathered cowboy who might be her salvation or her ruin. Temperance Blackwood had never imagined desperation could taste like copper pennies on her tongue. The stranger before her removed his hat with calloused fingers, revealing storm-gray eyes that seemed to catalog every crack in her composure. "I need a husband by tomorrow morning," she said. The words fell between them like stones in still. "Water, or I lose everything." Outside, her twins chased chickens across the dusty yard. Their laughter drifted through the open window, innocent and bright against the weight of what she was asking. Justice and liberty had no idea their world balanced on the edge of a knife. The cowboy studied her with unsettling intensity. Something flickered behind those gray eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or guilt. "Ma'am, I'll be your husband." His voice carried the rasp of a man who'd swallowed too much desert wind. "But I got conditions of my own." Temperance felt the earth shift beneath her feet. 24 hours ago, she'd been a respectable widow managing her late husband's ranch. Now she stood ready to marry a complete stranger to save her children's future. The morning that changed everything had begun with mockingbirds and the scent of coffee brewing. Temperance had been mending Justice's torn shirt when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that would later echo in her nightmares. Cornelius Whitmore filled her doorframe like a storm cloud. His expensive suit and gold watch chain spoke of power that could crush small ranches without effort. Behind him stood a younger man with a leather satchel and the nervous energy of someone delivering. "Bad news, Mrs. Blackwood." Whitmore's voice carried the smoothness of oil on water. "I'm afraid we have business to discuss." The territorial law was simple in its cruelty. Single women could not hold large property deeds without a suitable male head of household. Temperance had 48 hours to comply or face immediate eviction. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said. Her voice stayed steady despite the ice forming in her chest. "I've managed this ranch perfectly well since then." Whitmore's smile held no warmth. "I'm sure you have, dear, but the law is quite clear. A woman alone cannot be trusted with such responsibilities." The papers he spread across her kitchen table revealed Samuel's hidden shame. Gambling debts she'd never known existed. Legal documents. That gave Whitmore grounds to seize everything they'd built together. Justice and liberty burst through the back door, dirt-streaked and grinning. They froze when they saw the strange men in their mother's kitchen. "Mama?" Liberty's voice was small. Temperance forced a smile. "Go wash up for supper, babies." These gentlemen were just leaving. After they'd gone, Whitmore leaned back in Samuel's chair. Such lovely children. It would be a shame to see them homeless. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Temperance's hands clenched beneath the table until her knuckles went white. "What do you want?" "Simple compliance with the law. Find yourself a husband, or I'll be forced to protect those children from an unfit mother." The words struck like physical blows. Temperance had raised those children alone for months. She'd balanced books, mended fences, and kept the ranch profitable. Through sheer determination. None of it mattered to men like Whitmore. After they left, she sat in Samuel's chair and stared at the papers scattered across her table. The ranch that had been their sanctuary now felt like a trap closing around them. That evening, she rode to town with desperate purpose. The newspaper office smelled of ink and desperation from a dozen other souls seeking salvation in printed words. The advertisement she placed was simple. "Respectable widow seeks temporary business arrangement with honorable gentleman. Discretion essential." She paid for publication in 3 neighboring towns, spending money they couldn't afford, on a gamble that might destroy them all. Only one man answered. He appeared at sunset like something conjured from her desperation. Tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard living and harder choices. His horse bore an expensive brand that seemed at odds with his simple clothes. "You placed an advertisement," he said. Temperance nodded, studying him. Through the screen door, "What's your name?" "Ezekiel Crowfeather. Most folks call me Zeke." Something about his voice tickled her memory, but she couldn't place it. Why would you answer such an advertisement? His gray eyes met hers steadily. A man's got his reasons. They sat on her porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. Zeke asked questions that seemed odd for a drifter seeking temporary work. He wanted to know about Samuel's death, about the ranch's water rights, about debts and creditors. "You seem to know a lot about ranching for a hired hand," she observed. "I've been around." Justice and Liberty peered at him through the window, whispering to each other about the stranger on their porch. When Zeke noticed their attention, something in his expression softened. "They favor their father," he said quietly. Temperance's breath caught. "You knew Samuel?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment. "I knew of him." The evasion felt deliberate, but Temperance had no luxury for doubt. Time was running out like sand through her fingers. "The arrangement would be temporary," she said. "A marriage in name. Only, just long enough to satisfy the law. And after?" "After, you'd be free to go wherever you please." Zeke studied the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. "What if I didn't want to leave?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Temperance said. As night settled over the ranch, they shook hands on the porch where Samuel had once kissed her goodnight. The contact was brief but electric, sending warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the cooling air. By morning, she would be married to a stranger whose gray eyes held secrets she was afraid to uncover. The justice of the peace married them in his dusty office with words that felt hollow as dried corn husks. Temperance wore her Sunday dress, the blue one Samuel had loved. Zeke stood beside her in clothes that looked too fine for a drifter, his hands steady while hers trembled. "You may kiss the bride." They shared a brief touch of lips that tasted of desperation and secrets. Justice and Liberty clapped from their wooden chairs, delighted by the sudden addition of a papa to their small world. Cornelius Whitmore arrived minutes after the ceremony ended. His face twisted with barely contained fury as he examined the marriage certificate with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. "This seems rather convenient," he said. The justice of the peace adjusted his spectacles. "Marriage is legal and binding, Mr. Whitmore. The lady has complied with territorial law." Whitmore's cold eyes fixed on Zeke. Something passed between the two men, quick and sharp as lightning. Recognition flickered in the older man's face before disappearing behind a mask of professional disappointment. Indeed, how fortunate for Mrs. Blackwood to find such a suitable husband on such short notice. The threat in his voice made Temperance's skin crawl. But the law was the law, and they had followed it to the letter. The ride home stretched in uncomfortable silence. Justice and Liberty chattered about their new papa while Zeke's jaw worked, as if he were chewing words too bitter to swallow. That first night, he made his bed in Samuel's old study. The children protested, confused by the sleeping arrangements of their newly married parents. "Papa Samuel used to sleep in there when he was sick," Liberty whispered to her brother. "Maybe Papa Zeke is sick too," Justice replied. Their innocent words cut deeper than any blade. Temperance found herself staring at the ceiling, listening to the stranger moving around her dead husband's sanctuary. Morning brought the awkward choreography of shared space. Zeke rose before dawn and had coffee brewing when she entered the kitchen. He'd already started the fire and set out plates for breakfast. "You don't have to do that," she said. He poured coffee into Samuel's favorite mug without looking at her. A man should pull his weight. The children warmed to him with the easy acceptance of the young. He showed Justice how to properly bridle a horse and taught Liberty to whistle through her fingers. When they called him Papa Zeke, something flickered across his features that looked almost like pain. Town required their first public performance as husband and wife. The general store buzzed with curious glances and whispered speculation. Temperance had prepared for scrutiny, but she hadn't prepared for how natural it felt when Zeke's hand settled on the small of her back. Mrs. Henderson from the hotel approached with predatory curiosity. Such a whirlwind romance, dear. However, did you meet? Temperance's mouth went dry, but Zeke stepped smoothly into the silence. Mutual friends, he said. His voice carried an authority that made further questioning seem impolite. At the Mercantile, he demonstrated unsettling familiarity with local families and their histories. When old Tom Miller complained about cattle thieves, Zeke offered specific advice about patrol routes and security measures. You seem to know a lot about ranching for a drifter, Tom observed. Zeke's smile never reached his eyes. A man picks up things along the trail. The deflection was smooth, practiced. Too practiced. That evening, Temperance watched him work with the horses. His hands moved with the confidence of someone born to ranch life. The way he read the animals, anticipated their movements, spoke of years of experience. She found him later in Samuel's study, reading through business ledgers with the focus of an accountant. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the furrow between his brows. Just trying to understand the ranch's needs, he said when he noticed her watching. But his familiarity with the documents suggested something deeper. He turned pages as if he'd seen them before, made notes in margins with the ease of someone who understood cattle markets and feed costs. The next morning brought visitors. 3 men on horseback, dust-covered and travel-worn. They asked for Boss Crow Feather with voices that carried deference mixed with fear. Zeke's entire demeanor shifted when he saw them. The gentleman who'd braided Liberty's hair became someone else entirely. Harder, colder. The transformation was so complete, it made Temperance's breath catch. He spoke with them away from the house, his posture straight and commanding. Whatever passed between them was brief and intense. The men rode away without looking back. Old acquaintances, Zeke said when she asked. But the way they'd looked at him spoke of something more complex than casual friendship. They'd treated him like someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. That night, she heard him talking to someone outside. His voice carried through the open window, tense with barely controlled emotion. I can't keep lying to her forever. The words hit her like cold water. Temperance pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. The children are getting attached. She's getting attached. A pause. Wind rustled through the cottonwoods, masking whatever response came from the darkness. I know what I agreed to, but this is different now. The conversation ended with the sound of retreating hoofbeats. Zeke remained outside for a long time, a solitary figure silhouetted against the star-filled sky. When he finally came inside, Temperance pretended to sleep. But she lay awake until dawn, turning his words over in her mind like stones in a riverbed. The fake marriage that was supposed to solve her problems had brought new complications she wasn't prepared to face. The stranger she'd wed to save her children was harboring secrets that could destroy them all. Yet in the quiet moments between deception and doubt, when he taught her son to rope or braided her daughter's hair, she caught glimpses of the man beneath the mystery. Those glimpses terrified her more than any secret ever could. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the careful evasions and the late-night conversations with shadows, she was beginning to care for Ezekiel Crow Feather. And caring for a man whose true nature remained hidden was the most dangerous gamble of all. Temperance began her investigation the way a hunter tracks wounded prey. Carefully, quietly, with growing certainty that her quarry was more dangerous than he appeared. Zeke's horse bore the brand of the Lazy Bayou Ranch, burned deep into the sorrel's flank. She recognized the mark from cattle drives that passed through their land. The Lazy Bayou belonged to one of the territory's wealthiest families. His saddlebags, which he kept locked in the barn, showed wear patterns consistent with fine leather. The kind a working cowboy couldn't afford. His boots were custom-made, the stitching too precise for general store purchases. At night, when he thought she was sleeping, she heard him moving through the house with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to navigating in darkness, not stumbling, not hesitating, moving through her home as if he'd walked these halls. Before, the children noticed nothing. To them, Papa Zeke was simply part of their world now. He braided Liberty's hair each morning with gentle fingers. He taught Justice to read the weather in cloud formations and wind patterns. When Liberty had nightmares about losing their home, Zeke sat beside her bed until she fell back asleep. His presence calmed her in ways that made Temperance's chest tighten with something between gratitude and fear. The ranch prospered under his care. Fences that had sagged for months stood straight and strong. The well that had been giving trouble suddenly ran clear and cold. He moved through tasks with efficiency that spoke of lifelong familiarity with ranch management. Too much familiarity. She found him in Samuel's study one evening, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. The lamplight caught the furrow between his brows as he studied figures that should have been foreign to a drifter. "These water rights," he said without looking up. "Your husband was smart to secure them when he did." Temperance's pulse quickened. The water rights had been Samuel's most closely guarded business secret. He'd negotiated them privately, told no one except the territorial commissioner. The documents were locked in his desk, hidden behind false backing. "How do you know about those?" Zeke's hands stilled on the papers. For a moment, silence stretched between them like a bridge ready to collapse. Lucky guess. The lie fell flat in the small room. Temperance stepped closer, studying his face in the wavering light. "You're not who you say you are." He set down the pen with deliberate care. When he looked at her, something had shifted in his expression. The mask was slipping. "None of us are exactly who we say we are. Don't riddle me, Ezekiel. My children's lives depend on the choices I make. I need truth." He stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the pasture where Samuel used to work his horses. The moonlight turned his profile into something carved from stone. "I told you I was the estranged son of a wealthy rancher. That much was true. Which rancher?" The pause stretched long enough for her to hear her own heartbeat. "Does it matter?" "Everything matters now." Zeke turned back to face her. In the lamplight, his eyes held depth she was afraid to explore. "I left that life behind for good reasons. What I was doesn't define what I am now." But Temperance had learned to read the spaces between words, his educated speech, his knowledge of territorial politics, the deference those mysterious visitors had shown him. "Your father's the one trying to take my ranch." It wasn't a question. The certainty had been building in her chest like storm pressure, waiting for release. Zeke's silence was answer enough. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She'd invited the enemy into her home, let him sleep under her roof, allowed her children to love him. The fake marriage had been his idea from the beginning. A way to destroy them from within. "Get out. Temperance, listen to me. Get out of my house." Her voice carried the kind of quiet fury that made him step backward. But he didn't leave. Instead, he moved closer, his hands raised as if approaching a spooked horse. "I came here for him, yes, but not to hurt you. Liar. Samuel was my friend." The words stopped her cold. Samuel had never mentioned knowing anyone named Ezekiel. He'd been careful about friendships, protective of his family's privacy. "Samuel wrote to me before he died. He was worried about debts, about what would happen to you and the children if something went wrong." Zeke moved to Samuel's desk, withdrawing a letter from the hidden compartment she thought only she knew about. The paper was worn from handling, the ink faded but recognizable. Samuel's handwriting, she read with growing disbelief. Her husband's words painted a picture of friendship stretching back to childhood, shared adventures and mutual trust. A bond forged in youth and maintained through years of separation. The letter spoke of debts and dangers, of Cornelius Whitmore's growing interest in their land, of Samuel's fear that his family would be left vulnerable if the worst happened. "He asked me to watch over you," Zeke said quietly, "to help if you needed it." Temperance stared at the letter until the words blurred. Samuel had kept this friendship secret, just as he'd hidden his gambling debts. How many other secrets had he carried to his grave? "So you came to honor his request by helping your father steal our home?" "I came to honor his request by protecting you from my father." The distinction felt fragile as spun glass. Temperance set the letter aside, her hands shaking with exhaustion and confusion. "The fake marriage was your idea." "The fake marriage bought us time while I figured out how to save the ranch legally." "Us?" Zeke's expression softened. When he looked at her now, she saw something that made her chest tighten with dangerous warmth. "I didn't plan on caring about you. About them." His admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods with the sound of whispered secrets. "Your father will destroy us when he finds out." "He won't find out. Men like Cornelius Whitmore don't stay fooled forever." Zeke moved to the window again, staring out at land that had become precious to him in ways he hadn't expected. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. "Then we better make sure this marriage becomes real, before he figures out it started as pretense." The words settled over them like dust after a storm. Temperance felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once again. The fake husband she'd married to save her children was asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. Trust, but trust required honesty, and Ezekiel Crowfeather was still hiding pieces of himself in shadows she couldn't penetrate. The truth had brought them closer to understanding. It had also revealed how much deeper the deception ran than either of them had imagined. The morning after truth broke between them, Temperance found Zeke mending fence in the north pasture. His movements held the careful precision of a man working through guilt. She approached slowly, her boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. "The children hurt us last night," she said. His hands stilled on the wire. "How much?" "Enough to know there are secrets between the adults in their lives." Justice and liberty had emerged from their room with wide eyes and worried faces. They'd asked careful questions about Papa Zeke and why Mama had sounded angry. Temperance had struggled to find words that wouldn't shatter their fragile sense of security. Zeke set down his tools and faced her. The morning light carved shadows beneath his eyes, testament to a sleepless night. They deserve better than lies. They deserve stability, safety, a home. "All things my presence here jeopardizes." The admission hung between them like smoke. Temperance studied his face, searching for signs of the deception she'd missed before. Instead, she found exhaustion and something that looked like genuine regret. "Tell me about your father's business practices." Zeke's jaw tightened. "He takes what he wants, uses the law when it suits him, ignores it when it doesn't. Men who oppose him tend to find themselves in difficult circumstances." "What kind of circumstances?" "The kind that make families disappear in the night." The words carried weight that made her stomach clench. She thought of justice and liberty, of the life they'd built on this ranch. The idea of running, of starting over with nothing, felt like drowning. "Why did you leave?" Zeke resumed his work on the fence, his movements sharp with controlled anger. "I found out what happened to the Martinez family. They had a small spread south of here. Good people. 3 children. He paused, the wire cutting into his gloved hands. "My father wanted their water rights. When they refused to sell, their barn burned down. Then their house. Then they were gone." "Gone where?" "Nobody knows. Nobody asks. That's how it works." The image of her own children facing such a fate made Temperance's blood run cold. She understood now why Zeke had walked away from wealth and power. Some prices were too high to pay. He'll do the same to us when he discovers what you've done. Not if we can make this marriage real in the eyes of the law and the community. You mean not if I fall in love with you? The words were out before she could stop them. Zeke's hands went still again, but he didn't turn around. Love's got nothing to do with it. This is about survival. But his voice carried a roughness that suggested otherwise. Temperance moved closer, studying the set of his shoulders and the careful way he avoided her eyes. What aren't you telling me? Plenty about Samuel. About why you really came here. This time he did turn, and the pain in his expression caught her off guard. Your husband saved my life when we were boys. I owed him a debt I could never repay. What kind of debt? The kind that changes everything. Zeke moved to the fence post, testing its stability with hands that shook slightly. We were 12. Swimming in the creek behind his family's place. I got pulled under by the current. Hit my head on a rock. Samuel dove in after me. The memory played across his features like shadows. He could have drowned trying to save me. Instead, he pulled me out and stayed with me until help came. That was a long time ago. Some debts don't have expiration dates. Temperance began to understand the weight he'd been carrying. So when he wrote asking for help, you couldn't refuse. I'd been planning to leave my father's ranch anyway. Samuel's letter gave me direction and an excuse to disappear. Maybe. The admission carried undertones she wasn't ready to explore. Zeke had been running from something when he arrived at her door. Her desperate need for a husband had provided the perfect cover for his own escape. Are you using us? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Zeke's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I was, at first. And now? Now I'm in deeper than I ever planned to be. His honesty cut through her. Defenses. She'd been prepared for more lies, more careful evasions. Instead, she found raw truth that made her chest tighten with dangerous possibility. The children love you. They love the idea of having a father. Any decent man would do. You're wrong. Justice and liberty had attached themselves to Zeke, with the fierce loyalty of children who'd been without male protection too long. But their affection went deeper than simple need. They responded to his gentleness, his patient teaching, his genuine interest in their small concerns. They see something in you that you don't see in yourself. Zeke's smile held no warmth. They see what they want to see. Children are good at that. What do you see when you look at them? The question stopped him cold. His hands clenched at his sides, and for a moment his carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. I see Samuel's eyes, his stubborn chin. The way he used to tilt his head when he was thinking. And I see everything I never thought I could have. The admission broke something open between them. Temperance felt the careful distance she'd maintained beginning to crumble. What did you never think you could have? A family, children who trust me. A woman who looks at me like I might be worth saving. His words carried the weight of years of isolation. Temperance realized that beneath his careful control lay a loneliness that matched her own. Is that what you want? To be saved? I want to be worthy of the faith those children have placed in me. And me? What do you want from me? Zeke moved closer, his boots crushing the frost-brittle grass. When he spoke, his voice held a roughness that made her pulse quicken. I want you to trust me enough to let this become real. Even though it started as a lie. Especially because it started as a lie. We both know what we're risking now. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching weather. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. Your father will find out eventually. Then we better make sure we're strong enough to face him when he does. Temperance looked at the man who'd entered her life as salvation and revealed himself as something far more complicated. The fake husband she'd married to save her children was asking her to risk everything on the possibility that love could grow from deception. The choice felt as dangerous as the storm building in the distance. But as she watched Zeke return to his work, moving with the quiet competence that had won her children's hearts, she realized the decision had already been made. She was going to trust him. The question was whether that trust would save them or destroy them all. Cornelius Whitmore arrived with the dawn, his entourage cutting through the morning mist like harbingers of judgment. 3 men on horseback flanked his carriage. The sheriff rode among them, his badge catching early sunlight with cold gleam. Temperance watched from the kitchen window as they approached. Her coffee cup trembled in her hands, sending ripples across the dark surface. Beside her, Zeke stood motionless as carved stone. "He knows," she whispered. Zeke's jaw worked silently. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, the only sign of the storm building within him. Justice and Liberty pressed their faces to the parlor window, watching the strangers with wide eyes. They'd seen enough difficult visitors to recognize trouble when it rode up their lane. The knock came sharp and official. 3 raps that demanded immediate attention. Temperance opened the door to find Cornelius Whitmore's cold smile. He'd dressed for the occasion in his finest suit. As if attending a funeral, he'd arranged himself. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, savoring the name. "Or should I say Mrs. Blackwood? I'm afraid there's some confusion about your marital status." Behind him, the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Tom Bradley had known Samuel, respected him. This duty sat poorly on his shoulders. "My marriage is legal and properly recorded." Temperance sighed. Indeed. How fortunate to find such a suitable husband on such short notice. Whitmore stepped past her without invitation, his eyes cataloging the modest furnishings with predatory interest. When his gaze fell on Zeke, something sharp and satisfied flickered across his features. "Hello, son." The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Justice and Liberty looked from their papa to the stranger with growing confusion. "Papa Zeke?" Liberty's voice was small and uncertain. Zeke moved to the children, placing protective hands on their shoulders. The gesture was instinctive, paternal. It made Whitmore's smile widen. "How touching. My son was always weak-hearted about strays and foundlings." "Get to your point," Zeke said. His voice carried an authority that made the sheriff straighten. "My point is simple. Fraud is fraud, regardless of the perpetrator's sentiment." Whitmore produced documents from his leather case, with the flourish of a magician revealing his final trick. Marriage certificates, birth records, evidence that painted their hasty union as the desperate deception it had been. "The territorial court takes a dim view of false marriages," he continued, "particularly when children are involved. The question becomes one of moral fitness." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Temperance felt the walls closing around them with inexorable pressure. "What do you want?" "Simple justice. This woman cannot provide proper care for these children. They need the guidance of a suitable guardian. Someone like you." Zeke's words carried ice that made the temperature drop. "I am their step-grandfather now, after all. Surely I have some claim to their welfare." Justice and Liberty pressed closer to Zeke, sensing danger they couldn't fully understand. Their trust in him was absolute, heartbreaking in its innocence. Whitmore opened another document, this one bearing official seals. "I've petitioned the court for emergency custody. Given the fraudulent nature of this marriage, I believe they'll find my concerns justified." The paper rustled in. The sudden silence. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods with the sound of whispered warnings. "Of course," Whitmore continued, "if my son were to return to his proper place in the family business, I might reconsider my position. Blood is thicker than water, after all. The choice he offered was no choice at all. Zeke could reclaim his inheritance and abandon the family he'd grown to love, or watch them destroyed by legal machinations they couldn't fight. Think carefully, Whitmore advised. Wealth and power, or poverty and disgrace. The decision seems obvious. Justice tugged at Zeke's shirt with desperate urgency. Don't go, Papa Zeke. Please don't leave us. The child's plea cut through the adult complexities with devastating clarity. Liberty joined her brother, wrapping small arms around Zeke's waist with fierce determination. We'll be good, she promised. We'll do whatever you want. Just don't go away. Temperance watched the man she'd married struggle with the most difficult choice of his life. His face reflected the weight of impossible decisions, the cost of choosing between security and honor. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet strength of absolute certainty. I renounce any claim to the Whitmore inheritance. I disown you as my father, and I choose this family over your blood money. The words fell into silence heavy as thunderclouds. Whitmore's face twisted with rage and something that might have been pain. You would choose poverty for sentiment? I choose honor over corruption. Zeke moved to the sheriff's desk, taking up pen and paper with steady hands. The inheritance documents he signed transferred his rights to Temperance with legal finality that couldn't be undone. Samuel's children deserve security, he said as he wrote. Land provides that security. I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and complicit in evil. Whitmore's mask slipped, revealing fury that made him shake. You've always been weak, sentimental, just like your mother. My mother was worth 10 of you. The statement carried years of accumulated resentment. Zeke finished signing and handed the papers to the sheriff, who accepted them with visible relief. The inheritance is legally transferred, Bradley said. The children's claim to this land is now unassailable. Whitmore's face went pale with rage. This isn't over. I'll destroy you all before I'm finished. No, Zeke said quietly. You won't. Something in his voice made everyone in the room go still. The gentle man who braided Liberty's hair had been replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. I know where the Martinez family went. I know about the burned barns and the families who disappeared. I know about the bribes and the forged documents. And the men who do your dirty work. Whitmore's confidence cracked visibly. You have no proof. I have Samuel's journals. He was thorough in his record-keeping, including records of your illegal activities. The truth hit like lightning splitting an oak tree. Samuel hadn't just been a friend to Zeke. He'd been documenting Whitmore's crimes, building a case that could destroy the older man's empire. The territorial governor is very interested in corruption among land agents, Zeke continued, particularly when it involves federal crimes. Whitmore looked around the room, seeing his carefully constructed trap collapsing. The sheriff avoided. His eyes, his hired men shifted uncomfortably. Walk away, Zeke advised. Take your men and your threats and never come back. Because if you harm one hair on these children's heads, I'll make sure you spend your remaining years in federal prison. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Finally, Whitmore turned toward the door, his dignity in tatters. This family will rue the day they crossed me. This family will sleep peacefully knowing we chose love over fear. After they'd gone, the house felt strangely quiet. Justice and Liberty clung to Zeke with desperate relief, while Temperance struggled to process what had just occurred. The man she'd married to save her children had sacrificed everything to protect them. Wealth, power, family connections. All abandoned for the sake of 2 children who weren't even his blood. You gave up your inheritance, she said. I gained something better. What? Zeke looked at the children in his arms, then at her with eyes that held depths she was finally ready to explore. A family worth fighting for. 6 months later, spring arrived with the promise of new beginnings. The cottonwoods budded green against azure skies, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from distant mountains. Temperance stood in her garden, hands deep in rich earth, planting seeds that would feed her family through the coming winter. The second wedding had been everything the first was not: real, joyful, witnessed by neighbors who'd come to respect the couple's quiet determination to build something honest from the ashes of deception. Mrs. Henderson from the hotel had wept openly during the ceremony. "Never seen two people more meant for each other," she declared, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Tom Bradley had officiated with genuine pleasure, his earlier discomfort forgotten in the face of their obvious devotion. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared tasted of promises kept and futures worth fighting for. Justice and Liberty had served as witnesses, solemn in their best clothes and glowing with happiness. Their Papa Zeke was staying forever now. The relief in their faces had made several guests reach for their own handkerchiefs. The ranch prospered under their joint leadership. Cattle grazed in pastures that stretched green and endless toward the horizon. The house rang with laughter and the comfortable sounds of a family at ease with itself. Zeke had proven as gifted with business as he was with children. His knowledge of markets and breeding programs transformed their modest operation into something that commanded respect throughout the territory. More importantly, he'd kept his promise to be worthy of their trust. On quiet evenings, Temperance would find him reading to the children from books he'd somehow procured, despite their limited means. His voice would carry through the house, weaving stories of adventure and honor that made Justice and Liberty's eyes shine with wonder. When nightmares came, he was there with patient comfort. When questions arose about their Papa Samuel, he spoke of their birth father with respect and love that honored the man's memory. "Samuel was brave," he would tell them. "He loved your mama, and he loved you more than his own life. That's what real men do. They protect the people they love." The children absorbed these lessons with the serious attention of students learning sacred truths. Under Zeke's guidance, they grew confident and secure, rooted in the knowledge that they were cherished. News of Cornelius Whitmore's downfall had reached them through traveling merchants and neighboring ranchers. The territorial governor's investigation had uncovered decades of corruption, land theft, and intimidation. The Whitmore empire had crumbled under scrutiny it couldn't withstand. Cornelius himself had fled to California, his reputation destroyed and his fortune seized to compensate his victims. The poetic justice of his fall had satisfied something deep in Temperance's soul. "He brought it on himself," Zeke had said when the news arrived. His voice carried no triumph, only quiet satisfaction that justice had finally been served. The Martinez family had been found safe in Mexico, living under assumed names. They'd returned to reclaim their land, their gratitude toward Zeke expressed in tears and embraces that transcended language barriers. Other families had come forward with their own stories of Whitmore's predations. The network of victims had grown into a community of survivors, bound together by shared trauma and mutual support. Temperance had discovered she was carrying Zeke's child on a morning when the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. The realization had filled her with joy so profound it left her breathless. When she'd told him, he'd gone very still. Then he'd gathered her in his arms with hands that shook slightly, burying his face in her hair. "A baby," he'd whispered. "Our baby." The wonder in his voice had made her cry. This man who'd grown up believing himself unworthy of love was about to become a father to a child created in genuine affection. Justice and Liberty had greeted the news with excitement that bordered on reverence. They'd appointed themselves guardians of their mama's health, bringing her wildflowers and insisting she rest while they handled her chores. "The baby needs to know we're good helpers," Liberty had declared with 8-year-old solemnity. Now, as summer settled over the ranch with its familiar rhythms of work and contentment, Temperance reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate gamble of a fake marriage had transformed into something deeper and more precious than she'd ever imagined possible. That evening, she found Samuel's journals in their old hiding place. The leather covers were worn from handling, the pages filled with observations about ranch life, family concerns, and growing worries about Cornelius Whitmore's activities. But scattered throughout were references to his childhood friend Ezekiel. Stories of shared adventures, mutual trust, and the kind of bond that transcends years of separation. Samuel had loved Zeke like a brother, trusted him with his family's future. The final entry, written just days before Samuel's death, contained a plea that made Temperance's throat tighten with emotion. "If something happens to me, I pray Zeke will honor our friendship by protecting what I hold most dear. Temperance and the children deserve better than what I can give them. They deserve someone who can keep them safe." Samuel had orchestrated their meeting from beyond the grave, using his knowledge of both their natures to bring them together. The fake marriage had been real from the moment it was conceived in his dying thoughts. At sunset, the family gathered around Samuel's grave as had become their custom. The simple headstone bore the inscription Zeke had chosen: "Friend, father, remembered always." Justice placed wildflowers at the base while Liberty whispered secrets to the man she barely remembered but loved through her mother's stories. Zeke stood with his hand on Temperance's growing belly, their future literally growing between them. "Will you always stay, Papa Zeke?" Justice asked, echoing the question that had once carried such desperate urgency. Zeke smiled, the expression transforming, his weathered face with warmth that reached his eyes. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away." This time, the promise carried the weight of choices made and sacrifices willingly given. The stranger who'd answered a desperate advertisement had become the foundation upon which their family was built. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, they walked home together through grass that whispered with evening wind. The ranch that had nearly been lost to corruption and greed now stood as testament to the power of love to overcome deception. The black widow who'd been looking for a fake husband had found something infinitely more precious. She'd found a partner worthy of her trust, a father for her children, and a love that had grown from the fertile ground of mutual sacrifice. The cowboy who'd arrived carrying secrets and guilt had discovered redemption in the laughter of children and the quiet strength of a woman brave enough to gamble everything on hope. Their story had begun with lies born of desperation. It would continue with truth built on the unshakable foundation of chosen family, proven love, and the kind of commitment that transforms ordinary people into heroes worthy of the lives they've been given. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.